Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action Podcast, back with another article review. In this episode, I want to look at a paper addressing one of the most well-studied things in motor learning and skill acquisition, the focus of attention effect, right? Comparing internal versus external. This paper, though, does kind of what I've been asking for, right? It's getting into some of the nitty-gritty of the details of it, rather than just trying external versus external on a new skill or a new sport, which has been shown a million times. Right? It's getting into some of the details, understanding it more. The specific paper I want to talk about is this one by Kevin Becker's group, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So Kevin Becker does a lot of work on focus of attention. I interviewed him on the podcast. He does a lot of great work where he kind of compares different conditions, control conditions, to try to understand it better, rather than just showing the same old effect over and over again. And what's going to be looked at in the study is what's known as the distance effect of focus of attention. So to remind you, right, focus of attention research in general, you get a better performance in motor learning with an external focus of attention compared to an internal one, right? But we also have this effect where the distance of the external focus from your body matters. So imagine I'm a baseball batter. I get you to focus on the ball leaving the bat, right? Versus where the ball goes out of the infield, right? Where it passes the fielder, right? Those two things are both external focus. You're looking at the outcome of your movement, where the ball is going, right? One of them is very close to your body. We'll call that proximal external focus. One of them is quite far from your body, distal external focus. Now I'm going to show you some other examples of this in a sec. What was first shown by McNevin et al. In a balance study where they had markers close to your feet or far from your feet, which is again external focus. They found that in general, the further the focus location is from your body, the better performance you get, right? And this effect is pretty consistent. It's somewhat mediated by skill level. So in general, we find experts respond better for a more distal focus of attention. Right? Moving that out really helps experts, where novices tend to perform better because with a more proximal focus of attention. Right? Let me remind you what the explanation for this is. So the main explanation for the focus of attention effect was proposed by Wolff, the constrained action hypothesis. The idea that when you focus internally, you disrupt automaticity. So through lots of repetitions, you've learned to automate a movement, being able to do it without working memory and attention. When you focus internally, you're essentially directing your attention at your movement. So you're disrupting these automatic processes. It's proceduralized knowledge. Okay. Well, the idea of the distance hypothesis is if you have your focus really far from the body, that makes you even less likely that you're going to be paying attention to what you're doing, because your focus attention is so far away. Okay. In ecological approach, dynamics, we think more of it in terms of self-organization, right? Focusing on external focus allows for better self-organization, both because you're focusing on your goal, the outcome, rather than the details of the mechanics, right? Which we want to let free to vary when you do an external focus, and just kind of, we're less likely to disrupt self-organization. So when we focus internally, we're essentially trying to impose top-down control, executive control, keep your hip in, right? Keep your hip open, whatever it is, right? So those are the two kind of explanations, okay, for this distance effect. And there's also kind of informational one, right? Focusing on outcome gives you more information, right? Gives you information you can use to adjust and adapt your movement based on the constraints for the next attempt, and so on. So that's the basic idea. As Kevin pointed out in this paper, though, there's kind of a confound with this research, right? Because the cues used compared are both more spatially distant and more temporally distant, right? So when I get you to focus on the contact point you make with the ball, that's essentially getting you to focus on execution, right? In baseball, you're getting you to focus on, or a golf club with a ball, right? I'm getting you to focus your attention during the execution, right at the end of the movement, okay? But I'm getting you to focus at a point of time during execution. That's very close to your body. So it's both spatially proximal and temporally proximal to the execution. Versus when I get you to focus on a distal focus of attention, say the hole or the fielder, right? That's both spatially far from your body, long distance. It's also temporally far, right? It occurs well after the action execution is already over, right? So what the authors wanted to ask in this paper is which of these matters more, right? The spatial distance or the temporal distance. Okay, and let me give you an example. I'll show you this. I just want to show you the example of this. So this was a recent paper by Harjim Singh, a really great paper looking at how focus of attention changes movement coordination using uncontrolled manifold analysis. I say this all the time, really good study. But I just want to show you this compound is very present, right? So they had an internal focus of attention condition, focus on your hand. They had a proximal external focus of attention, focus on contacting the middle of the ball. So both close to your body, focus on the ball, which is external, but close to your body and temporally during the execution. Their distal external focus condition was focused on hitting the target on the other side of the net. So far from your body in terms of spatial distance, but also far in time, it's well after your execution, right? So most studies that look at this distance effect have this compound, right? It doesn't make them invalid. It's just something we want to look at in more detail. Okay. So the present study, what they're going to do is they're going to look at five different conditions. They're going to have a baseline condition where they don't tell you anything to focus on. They're going to get you to focus internally during execution, internally after execution, externally during, and externally after. Right. So they're going to separate this. They're going to separate the space and time distance. Okay. So what they had is 38 athletes, active adults, 11 males and 27 females. What the task was throwing a medicine ball for distance, right? So they're trying to make the maximum throw for distance of a medicine ball. The dependent variable was the distance the ball traveled, right? They did a pretest of 3 throws where they were given no instruction about what to focus on. Following this, they then went through each of the 4 different attentional conditions in a counterbalanced order, right? So it's a within subjects design. They used the standard manipulation check where they asked the person afterwards, how much were you focusing on the actual thing I told you to focus on, right? Which has its limitations, just doing this a kind of self-report, but it's better than nothing. And it's been used in most of the studies. So I'm not going to pick on it here. I've done it elsewhere, right? So that's the basic design, right? So what were the specific cues? So internally during, what we're getting you to focus on, extending your arms and legs during the throw. So extending your arms during the throw. Internal, it's on your body, right? During, it's while the execution. Internally after, focus on, so what they were talking about is after the throw, we want you to land with bent legs. So they're focusing on internal, what you're doing with your legs, well after you've released the ball. So it's internal after. External during, it's focused on accelerating the ball through the throw, right? So external, focus on the ball during the execution, and external after, focus on throwing the ball as close as possible to a cone target, right? So focusing on the cone, external, you're focusing on something that occurs where the ball lands well after execution. Right? So these are the 4 different conditions. Here's what they found. So throwing distance. So baseline, here's the distance in meters, 6 meters. Here's the different extension. Main effect they found was that both external during and after had greater throwing distance than internal during and internal after. Okay, and internal, internal after was worse than baseline. Okay, so you can see baseline, internal, either of the internal, whether it's during or after, both resulted in shorter distance than the baseline. External, both resulted in further distance. So we replicated the classic effect, right? External focus of attention results in better performance than internal focus of attention, right? It doesn't seem to matter whether it's spatially or temporally distance. They seem to get the same effect. Okay. In terms of manipulation check, there's a couple things, little things I want to talk about here. One of the issues here, right, is compliance, right? So if you look at how often people reported, percentage of time they reported focusing on the after thing, it was significantly worse for the internal after, right? Because what we're going to talk about in the sentence, the internal cue they gave them was kind of irrelevant to performance, right? So landing with bent knees, right? Didn't really, that's not going to affect how far you throw the ball, right? So in this case, right? So you not surprisingly, people didn't report, they didn't really focus on that as much, right? Because probably they didn't feel it mattered as much as compared to the other cues. Okay, so the conclusion, what they found was they found that the most effective cue is an external cue that represents the action. It doesn't seem to matter, you get this distance effect. It doesn't seem to matter whether it's during the action or after the action. They both had effect. As I noted, using an outcome cue unrelated to intended action does not enhance motor performance, right? So having a spatially distant, temporally distant, internally focused cue doesn't seem to result in good performance, right? One thing I would like to see tried, is if we believe this, they couch it mostly in terms of constrained action hypothesis. If we believe in the self-organization informational, right? I would like to see them. Can we think of an internal cue that is more relevant to the action, right? So, something, for example, something to do with acceleration. Like I use a task in baseball batting sometimes where I have batters step in the direction they hit the ball because I want them to prove how they're dissipating the force. But if I got them to focus on their body then, because it is relevant to the task I've given them, right, is relevant. Deceleration is relevant to the overall performance. I wonder if you would get the same effect. So that's the only kind of question I have about this study. But overall, I think it's a great study, really, as typical of this group. Very clean, nice design, and again, showing this kind of effect. But the distance effect, it doesn't seem to matter, like both spatial distance and temporal distance, right? It doesn't seem to be affecting the performance. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining me. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.